Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to MIT's press briefing with MIT professors and now laureates Daron Acemoglu and Simon Johnson. Whether you're on the line as a journalist or just following along with the live webcast, we're grateful for your interest in economic sciences, for joining us and recognizing their important contributions to knowledge for the benefit of humankind, and for your time today. We're just about ready to get started, but a few brief logistical items up top. MIT President Sally Kornbluth is on the line with us. She will get us started with congratulatory remarks on behalf of our entire MIT family. Our economists will then each offer some brief reflections, and then we'll open for Q&A. At that point, journalists, if you have a question, please raise your hand using the button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. When I open your line, please restate your name and outlet before asking your question. For those of you following along, especially if there are any former students or former student journalists out there, if we can get a couple questions in from you, we will. Just email those to questions@mit.edu. As a bit of trivia for the students watching today, Professor Johnson notes he himself first set foot on MIT's campus 39 years ago in 1985 as a graduate student and earned his PhD in economics in 1989. So we're so glad you're all with us. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Sally Kornbluth, MIT's president. Sally?
Thank you, Kimberly, and good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to say out loud what you already know. This morning, the 2024 Sverrius Riksbank Prize in Economic Sciences in memory of Alfred Nobel was awarded to Daron Acemoglu Institute Professor and Simon Johnson, the Ronald A. Kurtz 1954 Professor of Entrepreneurship at the MIT Sloan School of Management. They share the award with James Robinson of the University of Chicago for studies of how institutions are formed and affect prosperity. Through extensive historical studies over time and across societies, their work has demonstrated the profound extent to which a nation's economic growth and prosperity depend on healthy societal institutions, including the rule of law. Daron and Simon are prolific and influential scholars. I cannot begin to enumerate their accomplishments here, including their work as mentors and teachers. And I know that we're all eager to hear from the laureates themselves, so I'll offer just a brief observation. Simon and Daron reflect a kind of MIT ideal, in the excellence and rigor of their work, certainly, but also in at least two other ways. First, and as this morning's three-way prize illustrates, their work is extraordinarily collaborative. They are also co-authors of the 2023 book, Power and Progress, Our 1,000-Year Struggle Over Technology and Prosperity. Their united wisdom and insight have rightly made their views exceptionally influential. And second, their work reflects a very MIT interest in making a positive impact in the real world. Their historical investigations have a great deal to teach us about how and why real societies fail or thrive. And they have both become familiar voices in the news, public intellectuals trying to help us all make sense of a tumultuous world. I hope this award and last week's Science Nobels can serve to remind the nation and the world of why advanced research deserves our sustained and enthusiastic collective support. Now, Daron, Simon, to you both, and your co-laureate, congratulations. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Sally. It's wonderful. It's an amazing event, amazing day, and I am so happy to be sharing the stage with you, Sally, and with Simon. It's a long journey because the topics that were cited in the award statement were the ones that actually drew me to economics. Little did I know that that's not what economics was focused on at the time. And it was only towards the end of my PhD and I started thinking again, well, we should really be thinking more about these things. Is there a way of doing so? And I was fortunate enough to, first partner with Jim Robinson and then with Simon Johnson to sort of have this journey with them. And it's been a delightful one. And I think MIT has been a wonderful place. It's been really supportive. The rigor, the commitment to quality, academic integrity and detail at MIT, I think, is the best environment one could ask. So it's been wonderful to have this journey at MIT. Simon.
So my journey has also been a very MIT journey, starting in 1985. And I just like to echo what Ron said about the rigor of the place, and to emphasize to everybody that none of these journeys, these academic intellectual journeys, are easy. There's ups and there's downs. But my colleagues have always, in fact, one of them says this quite directly, but they've all, I think, communicated this one way or another, that you should swing for the fences. An American baseball metaphor, obviously, meaning that you should really try to go big. And I came to the issues that are for which we won the Nobel Prize after 10 hard years of working in Eastern Europe and really being quite frustrated with some of the answers that standard economics was giving. And when I met Doron, and when I learned what Doron and Jim were already pursuing, and we focused on those questions together, it was really quite liberating. It felt big. It felt very big. It felt like a big risk, Sally. It felt like a risk with my career. I didn't have tenure at that point, but it felt like a risk that I wanted to take, and a risk that MIT would reward if it paid out, and it did obviously pay off in a really big way. So thank you, Doron. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, MIT, in the form of Sally, for making all of this possible.
Thank you all so very much. Much appreciated. So at this time, journalists will open up the floor for your questions. Again, please raise your hand using the button at the bottom of the Zoom screen. When I open your line, please restate your name and outlet before asking your question. And again, for those student journalists and former students out there, please reach out to questions@mit.edu, and we're definitely going to do what we can to get to as many of those questions as we can do. All right. Darian Woods.
Hi there. This is Darian Woods from The Indicator from Planet Money. My question is around what the term inclusive institutions really means. Could this mean widespread education, infrastructure, and a mostly free market, but yet an authoritarian, non-democratic government, like which was the case in Taiwan, Singapore, China, and other fast-growing East Asian economies in the 20th century?
Do you want me to take that, Simon? Or?
Doron will answer all the hard questions. I'll just do the easy ones. I'll follow. Go ahead first, Doron.
Well, institutions are not a panacea. They provide a framework. So some of the details of good policy are, of course, things you build on institutions. But broadly speaking, we distinguish inclusive economic institutions and inclusive political institutions. Inclusive economic institutions have secure property rights and things that uphold something like equality of opportunity, a level playing field. So education, public infrastructure, the right kind of regulation are key. But we also emphasize that political inclusion, meaning a framework in which people have voice, power is equally distributed and not monopolized by one group, one person, one party, are key, and political and economic institutions are synergistic. It's very difficult to maintain economic inclusion when you are ruled by the iron fist of an autocrat. And that's the sense in which we also find, in some of the work that, for example, I did with Jim Robinson, Suresh Naidu, and Pascual Restrepo, that democracy directly itself contributes to economic growth, not easily, not right away. It takes a couple of years, and it's a difficult business to make democracy work. But generally, countries that democratize grow faster, and they grow the more right way, meaning they grow in a way that's more equal, invest more in education and health. So both political and economic inclusion matter, and they are synergistic.
So I would just add, Darian, I got a phone call from China this morning, from Beijing, a journalist from Beijing, who said, "What's your advice for the Chinese economy?" And my first thought was, okay, what can I say that A, she might be able to use, and C, won't get her into trouble? And I think that the basic finding that we have in our historical work is that, yes, you can have episodes of growth under different arrangements. But if you want to sustain that growth over time, it's much stronger and much more robust if you can move towards the kind of inclusive participation that Doron just outlined. And I would flag, for example, South Korea, which is where my wife's family is from. South Korea started out poor after World War II. In fact, in the early 1960s, it was very poor. It was quite authoritarian at the beginning. Over time, there was economic growth and an effort to democratize, which was difficult and messy. And there are plenty of struggles. It's not an easy journey. But I think as a result, the South Korean economy, which is not without its problems today, but it's in much better shape, and their achievements are really remarkable compared to what some other countries have been able to pull off. So I think that's the direction, Darian, in which our work, I think, should orient people.
Thank you, and congratulations to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. I'm now opening the line for Song Ho Song of Yonhap News Agency. The floor is yours.
First of all, congratulations to both professors. I understand, Dr. Johnson, you briefly mentioned South Korea's case, but I understand that two separate institutions on the Korean Peninsula, one in the south and the other in the north, have been subject of your long-time research, as shown in your book, Why Nations Fail. So can you share with us your thoughts on the future of South Korea's economic and social trajectory and how it can continue to remain on a successful trajectory through institutional improvements? And can you also give us your suggestions vis-a-vis how North Korea can change course toward a better future away from the current impoverished and repressive conditions? And where do you think North Korea will end up to be if it continues to be on the current path? Thank you. And my question, of course, goes to both professors. Thank you.
Well, first of all, Why Nations Fail was written by Doron and Jim Robinson, not by me. I am always happy to be confused with Jim Robinson, even more so today, I suppose, than other days. But Doron, do you want to take that first, as you did write that book?
Well, I mean, yeah. And in fact, South Korea versus North Korea contrast is at the very beginning of the book because it beautifully illustrates the role of institutions. The South and the North, according to the best data we have, were on a par before the country was separated and diverged in terms of its institutions. And over time, a more than tenfold difference built up. South Korea, exactly like Simon said, is not without problems. Democratization was very difficult, but the evidence that, for example, we have in our democracy and growth paper shows South Korean economy picked up speed after democratization and did so in a more healthy way. But right now, South Korea is still dominated by large corporations, which brings some benefits and some costs. And South Korea is dealing with one of the most rapidly aging populations. It has done reasonably well in that context by using a combination of technologies and other adjustments. But it is a very difficult transition. China will undergo it as well. But a country that's aging so rapidly is going to face many new challenges, and openness to new ideas, new technologies is going to be very important. In the case of South Korea, doing so via a competitive pressure is going to be more important as well. And I don't hold very great hope for North Korea. Its system is cemented, at least for now. And the advice to North Korea, well, who is the advice going to go to? I think one of the emphasis of our work has been, look, institutions are bad because they serve certain people's interests. They are bad often for society, but quite lucrative for the people who control the institutions. And North Korea is, again, a case in point. I don't think it is very fruitful to give advice to the North Korean elite, and the North Korean people are under great oppression right now. But I think that system is facing more and more difficulties, and one day, hopefully, it will unite with South Korea under a more democratic system.
Yeah, I would just add, I attended a conference in Seoul on managing the economic transition and political transition, presumably, in North Korea away from communism. It was a good conference, great discussion, lots of substance. It was 30 years ago, 3-0. So I think, as Doron said, this collapse of the Soviet Empire had some knock-on effects. So the reforms in China were consequential, and that also affected other countries. But North Korea retreated into its shell and has created a system that obviously favors a very few people, and a lot of people in North Korea have suffered over many years. And these few people are heavily armed, and they've acquired or built for themselves a lot of nuclear weapon capacity and also some rocket launch capacity that's not insignificant. This is extremely dangerous. And just because better, stronger institutions give you more inclusive growth and allow more people to climb out of poverty does not mean that all leaderships want to embrace such institutions. On the contrary, many leaderships around the world have gone in another direction in recent years. So there are many things to worry about in the North Korean situation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next question comes from Jeff Keating, I believe GBH Radio News. Let us know. Jeff, your line's open.
Yes, Jeff Keating, GBH, here in Boston for radio. Congratulations to you both. Can you please just describe the moment when you first heard the news?
I got a text from Kimberly. The Swedish, the Academy assures me they're trying to reach me early this morning, and I guess I have no record of that on my phone. But so I heard from my social network, which feels not inappropriate actually for 2024.
Well, I'm in Athens right now, and I was on the balcony of my hotel room.
Thank you. I'm pleased to take one from the website. Alex Tang, editor-in-chief of The Tech. Congratulations to you both. From an educational and mentorship perspective, I would like to ask how each of you approaches teaching this thorough approach to political economy to the undergraduate or the graduate student. How do you balance the study of history with an analysis of an ever-changing and turbulent present? Fantastic question from our MIT student.
I'll take that first because I teach most of the MBAs. Doron and I did a course for undergraduates last year. That was a lot of fun, but mostly I've taught MBAs, and MBAs are fantastic students. I think some of them are here, but I think they'll agree that they're always about, okay, how do I use this? Why is that useful knowledge? Show me what this means. So that's where I get pushed, Kimberly, and Alex. That's where I get pushed all the time by my classrooms, and I'd like to thank all of my many thousands, it turns out, of MIT students for pushing me in that direction, because it really helps sharpen the way you communicate these ideas and also the way that you think about it. Sometimes people say research and teaching can be disassociated, including in business schools. That's not been my experience at all at MIT. For me, they're very deeply intertwined, although I do not show regression results to my MBAs. I'll be quite candid about that. I've got to find other ways to communicate the big ideas.
Well, that's a fantastic question, and it's still work in progress. I go back and forth how to sort of balance different aspects of the work. But the part that I find very uplifting is posing the questions. I think the questions about long-term economic growth, the vast gap that exists between rich and poor nations, how the world has diverged and has failed to share prosperity. I think those are such major questions that it brings people in, undergraduates and graduates alike.
So just to put a point on that, the United States is about 335 million people. I think by far the most innovative society in the history of humankind. Plenty of problems, don't get me wrong. But we live in a world of 8 billion people with enormous unaddressed problems. And we develop all this technology. We're very good at developing technology, including at MIT, including other places. But whose problem are we trying to solve? Whose vision is driving that? Who's making the choices about technology? And this is what Doron and I have been hammering away on for the past 5 years. And that's what our latest book is all about, which is people who control technology, people who think deeply about technology, the scientists and yes, engineers who drive these processes have an enormous effect on the world, both in terms of who gets access to what opportunity, but also then through institutions, who gets to build what kind of generally democratic and inclusive society.
Very interesting. Thank you. Our next question comes from Paolo Mastrolilli. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Congratulations. Thank you for doing this briefing. I would like to ask you a question about the European Union. There have been a significant...
And Paolo, can you state your outlet, please?
Oh, yes. I'm the US Bureau Chief for the Italian daily La Repubblica. So there has been a significant backlash against the European Union in a recent year. Brexit, political parties in European countries that are against the European Union, also backlash in the US, particularly with the previous administration, with President Trump. Do you think that the European Union is still useful as an institution, and what reform would you suggest it needs to undertake to be a better institution?
Well, Doron is actually in the European Union right now and needs to be able to leave on his own terms tomorrow morning. So I'm going to let him take the first cut of that.
Well, the European Union also gained a Nobel Prize. I think it was about 10 years ago for their contribution to peace. And it is true. I think the European Union is an amazingly successful project. It was started as a way of easing tensions that people thought were inevitable, just like those that led to World War I and World War II. But more broadly, it is an effort to build supranational institutions, because many of the problems we encountered, and that was obvious after World War II, are global in nature. Domestic institutions are all good and well, but we need also supranational global institutions. And it's difficult business to build institutions. I mentioned democracy. democracy is going through a very, very tough stretch. The support for democracy is at an all-time low across the industrialized world, despite the fact that I think democracy is still essential and does quite well in general. So I don't find it surprising that the project of European Union is difficult and mistakes are always made. But today, I think we need the European Union even more than ever because we need different approaches to technology, different approaches to globalization, and different regulatory instincts. And we need a multipolar world. I think for all of these reasons, I still believe the European project is relevant and essential. But of course, it's not going to be one size fits all. I don't find it surprising that some people are going to want out of the European Union. And that is an ongoing challenge that European politicians will have to navigate.
So what I would say, what I would add to that, Paolo, is while we shouldn't excessively obsess about the impact of Europe and Europeans on world history, surely the biggest change to the state of the world over the past 70 or 80 years is that Europeans, West Europeans, no longer fight each other. If you read about World War I, and I read extensively because I think that was the beginning of a very, very difficult century, a lot of creative impulses, a lot of building of peaceful societies got diverted into an incredible confrontation with the development of technology, including chemical weapons, including ways of delivering high explosives to people at great distances and so on, that we're still living with. And the fact that the European Union exists today and grew out of that, essentially stopped, the France and Germany agreed not to fight and other people joined them in that. I think that's a huge accomplishment and we shouldn't lose track of that and we shouldn't forget it. And as Russia presses very hard on a European country, which is Ukraine, that's not a member of the European Union, we and particularly Europeans need to focus on that and understand that the extent and the importance of that challenge. So I'm a big fan of the European Union, what it's accomplished. At the same time, Paolo, we run at MIT for our executive MBAs a simulation every year. In fact, we're about to run the next one on the next phase of the euro area crisis. I understand the euro area and the European Union are separate, but you also know how they're overlapping. And I will just say that we started running this simulation more than a decade ago, and we always thought this will be the last year in which we can run a plausible next phase of the euro crisis. And every year we got fresh material, and every year we've got new pressures, and every year the students have to think through the macroeconomic responses. This is with Athanasios Orphanides, my Greek Cypriot colleague who was previously a member of the governing council of the European Central Bank and so on. So I think it's never over, Paolo. The problems are always there before us, and you just have to face them and confront them and go forward towards them on the basis of stronger institutions, better democracy, and believing that you should defend these systems against internal forces of chaos and worse, and external forces, because there are many people in the world who do not wish European and Western Europe well, and those forces need to be resisted.
I always love going to school, taking class with the laureates here. So we're in our last 10 minutes or so. I'm going to try to take a couple more from the chat. This is from Wendy Maldonado, who you may recall, Professor Johnson, one of your former MBA students. She asked, would you please comment on the role of women in economic participation and how that has affected the overall economies of the societies you've studied, positively or negatively? Have you seen progress and change in a positive direction over time? Or could you point any examples of countries that have done it particularly well and have enjoyed stronger economies as a result? Any examples in emerging economies in particular? So there's a lot there. Unpack the pieces you want. Keep it tight. But thank you.
So that's a great question, Wendy, and very important. Of course, Claudia Goldin won a Nobel Prize not too long ago for really digging deeply into all of these topics, and her work I commend to everybody. For deeper investigation or study or understanding of this question. I think that the rising voice and power and opportunity for women in this country over the past 100 years is absolutely fundamental, has changed everything. Mm-hmm. I have two daughters and I think they have great prospects and opportunities, including in science and technology, actually, that are just thrilling and that's got to be good for the world. And of course, many women and girls around the world don't have those same opportunities. And I think that's a major problem. It holds back. You can think in economic terms, you can think in political terms, you can think in human terms. So it's something to be overcome. And I met, actually, I should remark for Sally, I met with an alumni not too long ago who told me that she was one of only 2 women in the MIT class of 1952 or 1953. And now our classrooms are very evenly balanced, and the contributions are evenly balanced. And this is an amazing achievement, which I thank the leadership at MIT over multiple generations. And I think everyone should attempt to move in the same direction to the extent that they can and to the extent that it works in their situation. We've never said it's one size fits all or there's one magic wand to be waved. But I do think increasing rights and privileges and opportunities for women has helped everybody in the United States. And I think it's helped other places too. And I think I hope that it will absolutely continue and strengthen around the world.
Well, let me amplify that just with two thoughts. One is, we are in the age of AI, but I remain, and I think Simon does too, convinced that, human productivity, human ingenuity, human resources, broadly construed, are still key for flourishing and meaningful flourishing of countries. And any country that does not value and that doesn't leverage, it doesn't create opportunities for its women, is essentially degrading half of its resources in that fight. And no country in the 20th century has succeeded while doing so. And I think that will be even more so in the 21st century.
Thanks to you both. Our next question comes from Martin Sandbu at the Financial Times. Martin, your line is open.
Hi, can you hear me?
We hear you.
Very, very good. Martin Sandbu from the FT. Simon and Daron, congratulations. My question is whether you could state your view of the current trajectory of institutions in the liberal democratic societies. Are we on course for more extractive institutional forms or to maintain our inclusive institutions? And in particular, what do you make of the case that I think many people believe, and that's at least a plausible case, that we are moving in the direction of more autocratic, more oligarchic institutions with the electoral support of people who are disappointed by how inclusive so-called institutions, inclusive institutions have delivered for them economically and believe better economic promises from those who are heading in an extractive direction. Thanks very much.
Well, Martin, you're right to be worried because that is a real danger. And this is something I have done research on recently. If you look at support for democracy in the industrialized world, it's at an all-time low. People are much more willing to say they would be okay or they would support an authoritarian regime or dictatorship, military rule or rule by a junta. And if you dig deeper, it is at least in part rooted in their disappointment with democracy. Democracy hasn't realized its promise of voice for all and shared prosperity for all. And we find that democracies perform better, they get more support when they deliver on their promises, such as clean governance without corruption, more shared prosperity, better public services, and so on. And there are many other dimensions of democracy's failure. But despite all of that, democracies still have done better than dictatorships. So it's not that there is a better alternative out there, but it is very important that democratic institutions renew their social contract with the people. And by the people, I mean a broad constituency, not just a few selected groups, but the working class especially. And I think that is going to be key for a renewal of democracy. It will take time. It will be particularly difficult in the age of polarization, in the age of social media, which really poisons much of our discussions and political discourse. But I am still not optimistic in the sense that it will happen by itself. It will happen automatically, but I'm hopeful. Democratic institutions have shown great resilience and great ingenuity, and so have people. And that combination, I think, if it can free itself from the worst sins of our current epoch, in particular polarization, demonization of the rest, and the impoverished spaces, communication spaces of social media, I think there's a lot of potential there.
So I would add, Martin, first of all, thanks for your columns that you write on this topic. Really very helpful. And I commend them to everybody here and more broadly. I think that you're, of course, right. that the pressures over the past 40 plus years from automation, globalization, the decline of trade unions, they've really undermined the middle and pressed a lot of people down from that middle to the lower end of the labor market. Our colleague David Autor, with whom John and I run a research group at MIT, has a very famous graph that shows earnings for people with a lot of education have gone up since the 1960s in real terms, but not for people in the middle, and people with less education or didn't go to college in real terms may actually be earning less than they did in the 1960s. That's extremely disappointing, and that's a failure to deliver. And I think all societies are naturally held to account for that, and that includes this democracy. But it is incredibly important to emphasize, Martin, the choices that we make now about both the development of new technology, artificial intelligence, that's one of the things that Doron and I wrote about in our latest book, but also the rules of the game in electoral democracy. You know, if you don't like the composition of the US Supreme Court in the United States, there are many ways to work to change that within the rules. They may be difficult ways, it may be a heavy lift, but there's ways to change it. But rejecting the result of a free and fair election, refusing to acknowledge that result, or encouraging people to attack Congress when it's a process of formally validating that vote, that's not acceptable. Those are choices made by prominent people, by important people. Those moves, that kinds of actions can absolutely undermine, destroy any democracy. We've seen that many times around the world. It takes a long time to build strong institutions. It doesn't take long to overthrow them if you really put your mind to it. So once again, the US, a wonderful country, a country I'm proud to have joined, and I'm very happy to be an American citizen. I worked long and hard to become an American citizen. Thank you, MIT, for that as well. You know, we've had a bumpy ride on democracy, and what happens next in the November election is extremely consequential for whether we can sustain our better, stronger institutions and have more shared prosperity going forward.
So I think our next question from a visiting fellow at Sloan helps us get to how we get more people to listen to y'all and hear this. Sarah bin Mahfouz, visiting fellow at Sloan, asks, what a wonderful opportunity to join you for this. Congrats. She's a visiting fellow. Given the current state of the global economy, what areas of economic research do you think are most crucial for the next generation of economists to explore? And how do you bridge the gap between research and policy implementation?
Do I get started, Simon? Do you want to go?
Yeah, go ahead, Ron.
Well, I mean, I think there are a number of challenges the whole world is facing right now. I believe we know some things about those, but much more is needed. AI, how the workforce will adjust to it, how the future of work will adjust to it, inequality, an aging population, which is, the world has never aged as it has done now, and how we're going to work with that, climate change, but also more sort of usual problems that we've been struggling with, around the world, the Middle East, Africa. Still, there are such divisions and such insecurity that building anything approaching a vibrant economy is completely impossible for hundreds of millions of people. So some way of bringing peace around the world and building more stronger institutions from the ashes of the very difficult times that many different parts of the world have, I think that's going to be a continuing challenge.
My bumper sticker, Sarah, for this whole 25 years or more of work is more good jobs. Find ways to create more good jobs in your own community, around this country, other countries. Spread the prosperity that way. And as I have the undivided attention of the president of MIT here, I will say that, without risk of contradiction, that more effort into science and technology, more invention, more commercialization of that invention, and having the value of wanting to create better lives for people, both in terms of how the technology is used and the jobs that you create in that technology innovation process and in its deployment. That's what we've done really well. Okay, figuring it out, muddling through, no doubt, over the past 100+ years around MIT. When I was a grad student, by the way, the area around MIT, known as Kendall Square, was not in great shape. And it has really been transformed by a lot of technology investments. And that's fantastic. We need more of that. We need 100 of those. We need 1,000 of those. And it needs to be constructive to address the problems that Doron just identified for you. So who sets priorities? Who has the vision? Who makes the choices? If we don't do that at MIT, where else will people do it? And I think we do it at MIT, and we need to do more of it. And thank you, Sally, for your leadership, including on climate, pushing us all absolutely in this direction.
Thanks to you both. We have one more from journalists, then we'll try to get in one or two from former students, and then we can call it a wrap. So Thomas Fisherman, I think we're going back to Europe. The line is open.
Yes, hello, it's Thomas Fisherman from Die Zeit, and I guess that my question is very much related to the question from the FT. We see all these countries with perfectly good institutions and reasonable growth deconstruct their own institutions in a way, and this goes through populism, which has been mentioned. So my question is, what kind of research agenda do we need to look at the long-term dynamics there? Do we know enough? Do we have enough research in place to learn about the long-term self-destruction of democracies? And are there alternatives to this? I just spent a weekend in Singapore. Everybody told me that they have a much better long-term plan for suppressing any populism. Yes. Thank you.
Well, I think we have a lot of historical examples of long-term decline of institutions of very different types, including democracies. But of course, alternatives to democracy, that's very difficult to study with historical data or with empirical data, imagination and experimentation, and I think like the local level. But I also don't think the right word is suppressing populism. I think populism often is fed by grievances, and suppressing them makes things worse. So understanding populism and turning those grievances into a more positive force rather than the negative force that they become under populism is necessary.
You asked a very, very, very good question, direct question, Thomas. I'd attempt to address it directly. I think there's two major areas for research. One is about technology, how technology develops, how it's deployed, how it's used around the world, the choices that we make about technology, and how we can get better outcomes, defined, I would suggest, first instance, through more good jobs. That, I think, is a very big research area that Dron and I and David Autor are embarked on, and so many other absolutely talented people at MIT and elsewhere. The second, and I think you can get a lot of agreement on that, not an awkward topic, really. The second topic, I mean, let me be fairly pointed and blunt in the interest of time here. It's corruption. The corruption has two sides, the people who pay the bribes and the people who take the bribes. So there's a lot of hand-wringing in rich countries about corruption. There's a lot of criticism of other places and so on and so forth. And surely that is justified. And many of our rich societies have cleaned themselves up in terms of internal corruption. But who pays the bribes? Who's putting the money out there to get people to borrow more money, to get them to build infrastructure they don't need, to pad their bank accounts in whatever way? This is a scourge, and this undermines attempts to build resilient institutions, I would say, because it says to people, look, if you get power and hold power for a few years, you can become very rich and then live in XYZ country, tax haven, whatever. So I think these are the real problems that we need to confront, Thomas, and I think that anybody who wants to really dig into this and really confront and really answer the question, how do you control and eliminate and remove corruption? Which, by the way, Singapore did. And kudos to them for it, right? But not all authoritarian countries have managed to do that. In fact, most authoritarian countries, okay, I didn't just call Singapore authoritarian, be careful in how you quote me there. Many authoritarian countries have struggled with controlling corruption because it's just easy money and nobody stops you, and it's the rich countries, in many instances, that are paying for access to your raw materials, your natural resources, your oil, or very, very cheap labor.
Great question. Thank you very much. And one, going back to a topic that came up a little earlier from the webcast from Mohammed Hassan Dejana, a Worcester Polytechnic Institute Fulbright Scholar. Congratulations on the marvelous achievement. My question is, how do you see climate change impacting short and long-term economic growth and the role it plays in exacerbating the divide between the rich and the poor, and what needs to be done to address it?
Well, climate change is exacerbating the divide, both between poor and rich nations and between poor and rich people within a nation, because they have different resources to deal and adapt to change. But climate change is also an opportunity. Renewable technologies are an amazing source of productivity growth, and even a modicum of investment and a modicum of civil society support for these technologies have had transformative effects. So I think we should welcome the climate change, not the climate change per se, but the climate change challenge. I think there's much more to be done. But in line with the previous questions about inclusion populism, it cannot be done by fiat. It cannot be done by imposing it on workers. You need to bring the workers into the fold as well. You need to convince people that they are going to benefit from it, and it's not going to be something that are going to be forced into at the cost of their good jobs. And it's not something that is just dictated to them from above. And I think that's again a challenge for democracy.
Yes, I think that the recent tragic events around the two hurricanes, particularly the devastation in North Carolina, where I lived in North Carolina for 5 years, it's absolutely heartbreaking. And it should remind us that nobody is exempt. Even rich countries are going to be faced with terrible, terrible problems here. And I think that there are one answer on the what to do with climate change is about policy and changing policy. And there are things that can be done now. And of course, it's a long list and they're not being done for reasons that we can discuss. But the other piece that's super important is really swing for the fences, aim for the breakthrough science, change the world again. And I'm looking at Sally Kornbluth as I say this because she's doing this. I think that sometimes people say, well, that's the scientists and those are strange ideas and we don't know if they'll come to fruition. Well, no, actually, we've transformed the world many times with technology invented in and around major research universities in the United States. So now we need to do it again. Well, you know what? We've experienced, we have a track record. We know what it takes and we need to do more of it. And we need to make sure, as Doron is emphasizing today, and as he's emphasized in the 25 years that I've known him consistently, it's got to be done in an inclusive manner. This is not about helping a few elites become billionaires. That's not the goal here. The goal is, well, I think as the question suggests, the goal is save the planet, help a lot of poor people, prevent the sea from rising in a way that will be catastrophic to millions of, if not tens and hundreds of millions of people. That's a tough agenda, but I think we know how to do it, and I'm really pleased to be continue to be associated with MIT and all of MIT's efforts in this direction.
Thank you both so much. We are going to give the final question today. We're going to end with MIT alumna Reshma Patel, MIT Economics class of 1993, and I think it's a nice recap from what you all have been saying. What can the average person do to strengthen our democratic institutions? Doesn't democracy only work if we all participate in it?
I'll take this one first, Doron, seeing as you were just swigging water. Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's the essence. That's what we've learned over 250 years. There's a lot of people who want you to stay on the sidelines. There's a lot of people who say, well, your voice doesn't matter. I think the strongest societies in the world have been built from the ground up. And it's a struggle. It's always hard. Look, nothing about this democratic process, nothing about inclusive prosperity has come easily to anyone, including in the UK, the US, European Union, which we've talked about. So there's a lot of hard work ahead. And as some of the questions emphasize, this is a tough moment, a challenging moment, a moment of stress test. But yes, the choices that need to be made about technology and about political outcomes rest with us. And it's a responsibility that we need to take seriously. And if our research has pushed people in that direction, and if today's incredible, amazing prize award helps raise awareness, then I think all the work we've done over the past 2.5 decades has been worth it.
Well, let me end by saying 3 things, 2 non-controversial, pretty obvious, and 1 perhaps a little more controversial. 1, participate. That's what democracy needs. 2, avoid demonizing the other side. Try to understand the other side so that there is better communication. That's what democracy is about. But 3rd, I think walk away from all social media and media sources that try to polarize us. That's only by people walking away and not rewarding these really pernicious sources of echo chambers, polarization, pollution of communication that we can actually fix the system. We should stop rewarding them.
Thank you all so much. And that will be the final word today. Thank you all for joining us. Congratulations once again to today's laureates. Thank you, President Kornbluth, for being here with us as well, on behalf of the whole MIT community. Have a great day, guys. Enjoy it.
Thank you so much, Kimberly.
Thanks to everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.